Namaste and good evening to all of you. We start today with a little bit of delay due to the technical problems here. It is our evening of Satsang, and I'm in the middle, almost literally, of commenting the fundamental text known as Hatha Yoga Pradipike. I have just finished in my last conference the chapter number 2 of this text, which was consecrated to pranayama. And the chapter number 3 is a very powerful chapter, is the longest of the whole 5 chapters of this book. It has more than 100 shlokas, and it is focused on Kundalini Yoga, or on the practice of mudras and bandhas. Although the text is called Hatha Yoga Pradipike, technically speaking, Hatha Yoga should have at its core always the Kundalini Yoga, the practice of Kundalini Yoga. When you say Hatha Yoga, if you don't include mudras and bandhas and pranayama, it's not at all sufficient. And this very powerful chapter is telling us about some of the secrets of Kundalini Yoga. Of course, the text is all the time giving incomplete or skewed information, so that you cannot practice by just reading the text, because you don't know the details of many of these practices, which are supposed to be learned directly from a guru who will show you the important details, and with a very, very good purpose. I'm always telling to people, just because you listen to my commentaries on Gheranda Samhita, or just because you listen now to the commentary on Hatha Yoga Pradipike, don't think that you are already initiated in these things, because they have to be shown to you one by one by a teacher. And especially when we come to Kundalini Yoga, there is very severe danger. Kundalini Yoga is not to be trifled with. Accidents can occur due to the mistakes in practice, exactly as if you would be practicing other extreme physical activities, gymnastics, stretching, or others, and you would not be knowing exactly what you are doing. You could also risk some sort of damage. I will insist on these things when we come to the techniques themselves, showing to you that various things are missing. But let us go into the shlokas, into the verses. We enter in chapter number 3, the chapter on Kundalini, Bandhas and Mudras, which are giving some of the strongest techniques which exist in Hatha Yoga and Kundalini Yoga. Impatient people are very easily tempted to jump directly into these. We never do that in the actual teaching here in Agama Yoga, because that entails countless dangers. The yoga practice has to be gradual, in crescendo, and then people who have practiced for a while and they are very good at it, they can be taught and they derive many, many benefits from such techniques. Before their time, they will produce damage. Now, shlokas. Let's start with our chapter number 3. Just as the Lord of the Serpents, that's a mythological character, the Adishesha, the primordial snake, is holding the universe on its back. It's a myth from Vedic literature. Just as the Lord of the Serpents is the support of the earth with its mountains and forests, so the Kundalini, verily, is the foundation of all the practices of Tantric Yoga. They very often, when I read to you Kundalini, they just use the word Kundali. Kundala, Kundala means a coil. And Kundali is the feminine of that and means coiled one. But when Kundalini is mentioned as the snake, as the goddess Kundalini, usually in India the terminology is Kundalini. In some regional dialect and literature excerpts, Here we find her called Kundali. It doesn't matter, it's one and the same thing. So it says, just as the snake is upholding the earth is on the back of a gigantic snake, so Kundalini verily is the foundation of all the practices of Tantric Yoga. It mentions clearly this verse at Tantric Yoga, Tantra Yoga, both words are mentioned, and it says the basis of all of it is Kundalini. I often tell to people, I love Hatha Yoga, I love Tantric Yoga, I love Kundalini Yoga, first of all because being educated as an engineer and having a background in mathematics, physics, chemistry, I have always been a person who was in need of certain precision, of understanding what's happening, of understanding the engineering of everything. The engineering of everything is explained clearly only when you talk in terms of Kundalini, chakras, resonance, energy. Then you describe the mechanism of what is happening. Of course, some people don't care about the mechanism. There is this person and he gets angry. And we tell him, the energy has gone to your Manipura chakra and you are having a defective resonance there, and you are in resonance with everything which is anger and hate and all this. And the person says, it doesn't serve shit my state right now because I'm still angry, although you explain to me what is happening. I just want to kill somebody and I don't care about your stupid pseudo-scientific explanations. But for some people, knowing very clearly what is happening is very important, and Kundalini is exactly that. An Indian author who was unfortunately misguided towards the end after he got money and fame from it, he wrote a famous book, Kundalini, the scientific basis of genius, of spirituality and genius, or something like this. I'm talking about Gopi Krishna, who unfortunately had very, very skewed and partial Kundalini experiences and was unable to control this phenomenon well enough. And nevertheless, when you read the books of Gopi Krishna, and so on, the title is extremely suggestive. Kundalini is the scientific basis of all the paranormal phenomena, of all the paranormal capabilities, of all the high states of consciousness, of all the altered states of consciousness. All of it happens with Kundalini, because of Kundalini, and it doesn't happen without Kundalini. Whenever you have people who have altered states of consciousness or paranormal abilities and they don't know about Kundalini Yoga, it means that their Kundalini is still moving, but they don't know about it. They cannot discern clearly the cause behind the curtains. It's exactly like people who don't know they have a liver. They still have a liver, and the liver is doing exactly the same functions, the same vital functions in their lives. Therefore, to know that you have a liver or to study anatomy does not change the way your body works. People who don't know they have a Kundalini, they still have a Kundalini, and it works exactly in the same way for everybody. And that is why the access, the Kundalini Yoga, the angle of Kundalini Yoga is very direct, because it gives you the ropes of what is happening. It gives you the exact mechanism of what is happening. Second shloka. When by the grace of the Guru, the dormant Kundalini is awakened, all the lotuses and knots, which is a very specific word in Sanskrit called granthi, and it literally means knot, like when you make a knot on a rope. All the lotuses and knots are pierced open, and of course the idea is they are pierced open by prana. The text doesn't say. It says in your body you have lotuses and knots, which means places where the energy is locked, and they are pierced. They are pierced not by a knife, not by an arrow, not by a sharp instrument, they are pierced by energy. So here in the second shloka, first of all, we have the idea Kundalini for normal people is dormant, is asleep. This is both a measure of our primitivism, because Ramakrishna, when he was 6 years old, he looked up and he saw storks and he had a state of samadhi. That means his Kundalini was not really asleep, even when he was 6 years old. And therefore, it shows that most people are not sensitive. Sahridaya, as it's called in Kashmiri Shaivism, as Ramakrishna. So it's a measure of how blocked we are, how locked we are, how ignorant we are. But on the other hand, many gurus of yoga are grateful to God that people are born with their Kundalini asleep, dormant, because a Kundalini which is not asleep when you don't do yoga and spirituality, it's exactly like your muscles would be 100 times stronger than what they are. And your power would be, your physical power, your speed when running or doing anything would be like completely multiplied 100 times or something. Then people would hurt themselves much worse. People would do mistakes which are terrible. A lot of negativity will happen if we wouldn't have a certain proportionality. So the fact that our Kundalini is asleep in 99.99% of the cases is also a measure of the fact that we are monkeys, but it is also a protection from hurting ourselves by handling forces which are too big for us to control or to fully understand. Only with a gradual training in Kundalini Yoga, Kundalini can be gradually awakened. It's very, very, very seldom we teach to students that Kundalini gets awakened like this in a second, from 0% to, let's say, 50%. I don't even dare to say 100%. I would say 50%, which is horrendously much already. And somebody who gets a Kundalini rising from 0 to 50% of its capacity in 24 hours would be a person who would be subjected to the shock of the shocks, to an incredible shock, and might even die because of such a shock, or go crazy, or have other phenomena like this. That's why in practice, in yoga, Kundalini is something which is gradually turned up, exactly as you would go to electroacupuncture and the acupuncture practitioner puts electricity in your body, in your needles, and says, can you feel it? Is it too strong? Can you take a bit stronger? No, like you have to get used to the things and to be able to feel these things. So first thing is this: Kundalini is asleep for almost everybody. When people are born with Kundalini not asleep, partly at least because it's not black and white, then the things which happen can be very weird. Very often they are inexplicable physical and sensory phenomena, emotional, mental, and others. People like the American poet Walt Whitman, they had Kundalini experiences, and he even wrote a poem about his experience in which he says, I sing the body electric. You know, like his body felt like it was made of electricity, and he was singing about it in his poems. But Walt Whitman was considered crazy by his family members, like medically crazy, and he himself had serious doubts if he was losing his mind or not. And that's why Kundalini being asleep, it is awakened gradually by gurus to people whom they consider that they are prepared to take the shock of what is happening. The text also insists that generally Kundalini is awakened by the grace of the Guru. That means most people who got their Kundalini awakened in the last 1000 years in yoga, they got it from somebody. They were in contact with a person who had already awakened aspects of their Kundalini, and that person knew a way of transmitting it to them, of teaching them what to do. That's what we do in Agama when we teach Yoni Mudra, when we teach especially Shakti Chalana Mudra, all the beginning mudras of the Kundalini process, and then people discover that they can do it. They can go to 10%, they can go to 20%, and that things are getting stronger and stronger as they go there. As this energy starts running wildly through your body, because it's like suddenly somebody pours energy. It's not somebody, but it's the universe which pours energy in your microcosm. Then automatically that energy must go somewhere. And it goes in your chakras. And if it finds blockages or knots, the granthis, then it digs there. Exactly as if you put water in an installation, it goes everywhere and presses everywhere and circulates. And if there are any impurities left in the installation, it usually removes them by the flow. So the second gives us this gradual, beautiful image. When by the grace of the Guru, the dormant Kundalini is awakened, all the lotuses and knots granthis are pierced open by prana. Are there people who got their Kundalini not awakened by their Guru? Yes. Ramana Maharishi, he entered even in Samadhi without a Guru, experiencing a state of fear of death and having a coma, a sort of a... But Ramana Maharishi was a weirdo, and he was tormented by this experience for many years, and his life was upside down and really strange because of it. And Ramana Maharishi repeatedly expressed when he was older that he would have been very happy if when he was 16, 17 years old, he would have met a guru, and the guru would have given him the spiritual awakening gradually, and it wouldn't have happened to him like this as it did happen, and which troubled him very much for a long period of time. And that's why the general process is there are very few people who are born with Kundalini awakened without a guru. They consider themselves handicapped. Unfortunately, the New Age subculture has also created the demented belief that some people who suffer from schizophrenia and other connected phenomena, but mostly in the family of schizophrenia, many people with multiple personalities and with all sorts of mystical shocks, they actually are Kundalini victims, and they suffer from accidental arousing of Kundalini. While there are in some people some Kundalini phenomena, nevertheless, we are not talking there about the actual awakening of Kundalini, and the fact that people suffering from mental diseases and hysteria and emotional extreme problems, that they would have something which is because of Kundalini, is usually enormously false. Enormously false. So Kundalini is a concept which has to be handled with care. Many people think they understood what it is, but when we take them in yoga and we teach them, it is demonstrated that they did not understand. And if they understand correctly, then they can practice it and do wonderful things. Shloka number 3. Then, so when Kundalini has been awakened by the grace of the Guru, and the lotuses, the chakras, and the granthis are open, then the Sushumna, which is called here by a funny name, which will be taken later, is called Shunya Padavi. Shunya means void, so it's the path of the void, and that is a very intriguing name. So then the Sushumna, I will explain why, becomes the royal way for prana. Like prana loves to go into Sushumna, into the middle channel, but only when things have been opened properly. The mind becomes without object, without support. There is a special expression in Indian mysticism that simply means it's like you stay in a Zen meditation and you are not meditating on anything in particular. You don't meditate on the sun, you don't meditate on the moon, you don't meditate on the past, present, or future. There is just a state of observer. That is when the polarities are surpassed and the clear consciousness in Sahasrara is open. So the mind becomes without object, like a witnessing mind, and death can be cheated. You will see this theme appears a few times. Kundalini is considered one of the things which breaks the biological clock of the body. The biological clock works with Ida and Pingala, tick-tock, tick-tock, the clock of the being. And by going the energy in the Sushumna Nadi, one can either go directly into death in Brahmarandra, but then also the biological clock has no more sense. And therefore, it is considered that the people who work on Kundalini Yoga are the people who produced miracles, like Yogananda claimed that the guru of his guru, the legendary Babaji, was a Kriya Yogi with full arousing of Kundalini, and he was 2,000 years old or 5,000 years old or something like that. Then you say, I heard that some yogis were supposed to break the biological limits and maybe live hundreds of years. It's all about Kundalini. Kundalini is the one which is famous for doing that. Because of the wall of the silence, we don't see it. And those who have it, they hide it. If there is any yogi around who lived 300 years, they will not want or be able to prove it to you. One of the gurus from India who indicated that our school should be called Agama, he was at that time famed to be 240 years old. Today he would be 260 years old, and he was completely hiding from anybody. He was not taking disciples. He was not talking. He didn't even speak English, just not to mention that. So my communication with him was extremely difficult and slow. And I'm simply saying that if there are still such people in India, in Tibet, or wherever they are, these people will never rub it in your face or in the face of the world. And usually circumstances are of such kind that they will not even try to prove. And even if they try to prove, they would not be able to prove these things. And in this way, the world continues sleeping, its sleep of ignorance. And if there are a couple of people like Babaji or those, then you don't see them, you don't know them. And if you meet them, you would never suspect what is the true nature of their life and all that. But it is a classical statement in Kundalini Yoga that death can be cheated by Kundalini. It's one of the ways of destroying the biological clock, the biological time, because the energy going in Sushumna Nadi is not tributary to the tick-tock, yin, yang, minus, plus, like in AC, alternative current, plus and minus, and therefore defining the clock, defining the beat of the universe. Sushumna Nadi creates immunity to this flow of time, and therefore it is supposed to have this legendary effect. And then because it has used the name Shunyapadavi, the fourth shloka simply wants to tell us from the beginning, many people in many sub-traditions of India, they have called this central channel by different names. And those names are same but different, as that stupid t-shirt keeps saying it, and they quote it here. And they say, Sushumna, Shunyapadavi, Brahmarandra, Mahapatha, Shmashana, Shambhavi, and Madhya Marga are all synonyms, although not precisely with the same meaning. Because, for example, Brahmarandra, if you ask people who study yoga, they will say, yes, Brahmarandra is in the middle channel, but it's part of the middle channel. It designates like the last 10, 20, 30 centimeters, not the middle channel around the navel, the belly button, around the lumbar part of the spine. There it's not called Brahmarandra, it's called Brahmarandra only in the upper part. This text, Hatha Yoga Pradipika, says if it's Brahmarandra, then it's Sushumna Nadi. And if it's Sushumna Nadi, how do you know exactly where it starts and where it stops? Therefore, they are just alternative names for one and the same thing. And therefore, Sushumna, Shunya Padavi. Some of them I never heard in my life outside of this text. Some of them are used, like Madhya Nadi is used in Kashmiri Shaivism a lot, but there they don't use Sushumna Nadi. In Hatha Yoga, very often Sushumna Nadi is used, and so on and so forth. Brahmarandra is used by people who work a lot on Sahasrara and others. So the fourth shloka is terminology, and it tells us Sushumna, Shunyapa, Brahmarandra, Mahapata, Shmashana, Shambhavi, and Madhya Marga are all synonyms, although by centuries of use, some of them got a slightly peculiar meaning. Like Brahmarandra, again, very few people, when they say Brahmarandra, they will think about it's all the Sushumna Nadi. But Hatha Yoga Pradipika says if you take it by one end, you've got it all. You cannot separate it. You cannot just steal half of Sushumna Nadi and say only the last 30 centimeters. It's all of it. It's the whole Nadi. 5. Therefore, one should make every effort to practice the mudras in order to awaken the goddess. And here it doesn't use Kundalini. Instead of the goddess in Sanskrit is used the word Ishvari, by which Kundalini is equated with other forms of the goddess. In like the goddess is the goddess is the goddess. You know, we're talking about Shakti. To awaken the goddess Ishvari, sleeping at the lower mouth of Brahmadvara or Sushumna. So we are told that Kundalini is always at the lower end of Sushumna. Here Sushumna is called with the 7th name, which is not in the list from the previous shloka. Instead of Brahmarandra, he is called Brahmadvara. And of course it is explained that it talks still about Sushumna, just another equivalent name. So it is called Mukha, the mouth of Brahmadvara. No, like it's the lower entrance. First thing is that the energy should be able to go in Sushumna. Kundalini should be able to be awakened and move. And the shloka gives us the injunction. It is good to practice Kundalini. I would say definitely not for stupid purposes. Like if you have no spiritual purpose, you should not touch Kundalini. Okay, it can give some paranormal powers to some people, but even then it's more dangerous than actually wise. And you should not practice Kundalini if you don't want to take it to Sahasrara. If you don't want to take her to Sahasrara, then Kundalini becomes useless. It will amplify all your reactions. It will amplify your anger, your hysteria, your confusion, your madness. And if you don't do a systematic practice, take it to Sahasrara, take it to Sahasrara, then from something beneficial, it can become one of the biggest obstacles in your life. Therefore, here it says one should make every effort to do the mudras to awaken this, but of course that's valid for people who are into Kundalini Yoga. Shlokas number 6 and 7, they give us the list simply. That list is 80% the same. Other texts give slightly different lists. Like if you compare this with Geranda Samhita and with the Shiva Samhita, the list is slightly different, but it's slightly different because they use different names, because it comes from different centuries. from different parts of India. In the end, the big technologies for awakening Kundalini is always the same. There is a limited number of techniques which have been devised for that. So the shlokas number 6 and 7, they start the listing and they say Mahamudra, Mahabandha, Mahaveda, Kechari, Udyana, the famous Udyana, yeah, which we give to the beginners, Mulabandha, Jalandhara Bandha, Viparita Karani, Vajroli, and Shakti Chalana. These are the 10 mudras that destroy old age and death. Funnily, he said you should practice the mudras. Then he gave us a list of 10 mudras. Again, some of them have to be taken with a pinch of salt, like it says Vajroli. But people who did Kundalini Yoga program here in Agama, they know we don't do only Vajroli. And Vajroli is divided in 2 parts. So there is Vajroli 1 and 2, there is Sahajoli 1 and 2, there is Amaroli 1 and 2. Therefore, there are 6 mudras. So Vajroli is like a flagship. It's just one name which symbolizes 5 other mudras as well. And it's a set which is called in our system the Oli mudras, because all of them have this suffix Oli, Vajroli, Sahajoli, Amaroli to their name. And therefore, again, don't fight about the names. India has never been very organized about naming things. The name things are very slippery in India. Fact is that this text, as others, tells us in Kundalini Yoga, I, Svatma Rama, the author of Hatha Yoga Pradipika, I know of 10 big techniques which are awakening Kundalini. The one thing which I want you to remember is nevertheless the fact that the first one which you identified is Udyana. Udyana Bandha is considered by many people as still being one of the mudras. No? And to activate Kundalini, that's why in Agama, even beginners in level 1, they get a dynamite technique. We don't insist too much on it at that time, no, because we don't want to tickle their madness in any way, but Udyana Bandha is on the list. 10 Udyana Bandhas are 10 Udyana Bandhas. Thus, and when it's after giving them, it says these are the 10 mudras that destroy old age and death. It is true that one of the huge fears of mankind, even in the case of Buddha, and not only, of course, was the fear of old age and death. And it is true that old age is not always pleasant, and it contains a lot of deficiencies. And it is also true that many, many people have a fear of death. And thus, the mudras are brought here like attacking one of the main fears that humans experience. The mudras and the Kundalini Yoga exercises, they do much more than that. But remember that the shlokas in Sanskrit texts, they have to be very brief and efficient. They have to talk short, clear, give you a code word or two, and the rest you learn from the Guru. And that's why here they just boiled it down, saying these are the 10 mudras that destroy old age and death. Okay, very interesting boiling down. 8, shloka number 8. They were taught by Adinat. They are divine and bestow the 8 great powers. Adinat is the first of the Nat. Adi, Nat. And the first of the Nat means there is the Nata Sampradaya, the school, the Nat yogis, out of which the great founders are Matsyendra Nath and Goraksha Nath, the 2 giants who created Hatha Yoga and Kundalini Yoga. And Matsyendra Nath learned Hatha Yoga by overhearing Shiva talking about it. And therefore, the first guru is not Matsyendra Nath. Matsyendra Nath is the first man guru. But the first guru is actually Shiva, because Matsyendra Nath without Shiva would have never learned Hatha Yoga and Kundalini Yoga. And that's why Shiva got a new name by which he was called Adi Nath, the first Nath. The first of the Nath yogis is not Matsyendra. It's actually Shiva himself. So these mudras were, in the tradition, by tradition, taught by Adinath. They are divine. They are considered to be a divine gift because they have such high efficiency and bestow the 8 great powers. In yoga, there is a special chapter about the siddhis, riddhis, minor and greater powers, and the greatest of the powers associated with Ajna Chakra, which are powers which are beyond measure, like you probably, I don't know, maybe Jesus performing the miracle of bringing Lazarus out of his grave or something, he used one of the Mahasiddhis. But otherwise, the Mahasiddhis, although they are heard of, we don't hear about the fact that Milarepa was testing his 8 Mahasiddhis or something like this. They are gigantic. They are a little bit too big for the planet Earth. And it's said here that the mudras are the ones which bestow the 8 Mahasiddhis. They are the favorites of all siddhas. So the great yogis love, the ones who do Kundalini, they love this. They know this is the top of the top. And difficult to attain even by the gods. Here, when it talks about the gods, the text is actually using the word Maruta, and Maruta are minor deities. They are not the big gods. So they are not, we are not talking about Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, or things like that. Marutas are small deities, almost demigods. And therefore, it says difficult to attain by Marutas. So they are entities out there which have a high status, demigods, and still they cannot perform the mudras because they lack one or another one of the conditions which allow them to practice these mudras. I would not want to insist. This is a statement which often comes in the mystical literature of India. Sometimes when some techniques are really exclusive, it is said several times, not only in this text, that this is difficult even for the gods. And then it means like, okay, if you got it, value it, and it's a very divine gift. 9, they should be kept concealed like a casket of gems, like a box full of jewels. Yeah? They should be kept concealed. Like there is a very strange, it's a very clear philosophy about this. Don't talk about Kundalini unless when you teach Kundalini in a formal format. Otherwise, don't describe Kundalini. Don't, because the karma associated with these things is huge. So they should be kept concealed like a casket of gems, like you are afraid of the thieves, yeah? And not talked about to all and sundry, just as one does not tell anyone about intimate relations with a noble woman. Like in India, if there was a high caste woman and she was fucking around, that would damage her reputation really badly, and she might even be killed by an angry mob or something. The Indians were stupid fellows in this way. Not only the Indians, I think in the famous movie Zorba, the Greek, which is a legendary movie from the book of Kazantzakis or whatever, with Anthony Quinn, one of the guys there is having sex with a girl, and then there is an angry mob in the village, and that's in Greece in the 1930s or whatever, and they kill that woman because she's having sex with a Farang who happens to be British. No? And therefore, here it's an allusion to these rural cultures of India, where if a woman wanted to do some hanky-panky, she was supposed to be very, very cautious, very, very discreet. And it says here, it just compares it. In my opinion, the author makes other comparisons in the text before and coming up. And he has a sort of a wry sense of humor. He has a rural sense of humor. Like he could have said another element of secrecy. No, but he just introduces some sexual innuendo to it. And he says one should not talk about these mudras of Kundalini, just as one does not tell anyone about intimate relationships with a noble woman. And again, people in the 21st century in England would say, why not tell about who is a noble woman? I fucked her, that's it. But in India, in the 10th century or whatever, this was a no-no, and people reading it in that context understand, okay, it's something that you have to keep shush, you have to keep mum about it, because it's a difficult topic for a reason, or it has to be taught in the proper way. Then it will work, and it can be done with consecration to Shiva as an act of teaching Hatha and Kundalini Yoga, that it is allowed, but not like chit-chat or gossip or loose talking, not like that. And it starts directly in the shloka number 10 with the Mahamudra. Those of you who did Kundalini Yoga in Agama, it would be interesting for you to compare it with the scriptural source, like you know how to do it, and it's interesting to see how they skip certain details, and therefore when you read, it's obvious that somebody doing it by the paper, by the book, will not manage to do it. It will not work simply. And for those of you who don't know it, of course, yet I will call your attention on the fact that some things are obviously missing from this description. Shloka number 10, which starts describing the first of those 10. Now they dutifully will describe those 10. Press the perineum, and the word which is used is yoni. The perineum is called Shivani or others, but here in Sanskrit they use yoni, which means it's good for women also, and it is an allusion to also many of the sexual functions of this Kundalini Yoga. Press the perineum or yoni with the left heel, while the extended right foot is held firmly by both hands. Shlokas 11 and 12. Sometimes we have to take two shlokas together because there is 2 verses and a half saying one thing, and then they continue the idea, and you have to merge the shlokas. And because of that, sometimes you have to quote 2 shlokas in a row because they had to use more than one to express an idea. 11 and 12 say, perform the bandha of the throat, which is the Jalandhara bandha, and keep rising the breath or vayu, which is an internal thing, which only people who did pranayama before, they know, because it's the rising of energy. They say create a trend of rising. The energy should be dominant by udana vayu, and it should be utkshepana, the rising of the energy. That's why I say, to be able to do Kundalini, you have to have done some other yoga before. And then the idea, the image is used often and quoted often. And here there is a huge part missing. Because if you do Janu Shirshasana, that posture, and in that you perform a Jalandhara bandha, and you create some rising of energy, that will not become Mahamudra. It's exactly like you have a pistol, a gun, an actual gun, and it's all primed, and you put a bullet into it, and then you lock it, and then you shoot. But the trigger, the fire, the percutor has been taken out. And therefore the cock of the gun does not manage to hit the bottom of the bullet, and the bullet doesn't catch fire, and there is no shooting. And it's like you make and it makes click. That's exactly what is described here. A gun which is taken out a very important part out of it, and if you do this, perform that posture, which is called Janu Shirshasana, more or less, and in it you perform a Jalandhara bandha, and you try to keep a rising of the energy, and then the text says, as a snake when hit with a stick, Shakti Kundalini will straighten up like a rod. So it's like, vroom. Keep dreaming. Keep dreaming that this will happen by doing Janu Shirshasana with some Jalandhara Bandha, and there is something which is not said. There is something which sets the gunpowder on fire. That click, that hammer which hits the gunpowder and sets it on fire is missing, is simply not given. And the people who have been doing Mahamudras here in Agama, they know what that missing thing is, and they do it, of course, when they do their Mahamudras. So it says, you do whatever you do, there is something missing which we don't want to tell you because we don't want to tell you. And as a snake, when hit with a stick, Shakti Kundalini straightens up like a rod, and there is cessation of activity like death in the two other nadis, which are Ida and Pingala. So like suddenly the energy is not going into tick-tock, tick-tock. The energy goes in Sushumna Nadi, which is called Shunya Padat, the path of the void. So there is like a retention of the breath. One can hold the breath for a reasonably long time, and it's like something has happened that you say, my God, I didn't breathe for 1 minute or something. I was gone. That shows that the energy is not going through Ida and Pingala, it's going only through Sushumna. And remember this, because it says there is a cessation of activity like death. Actually, the word mritya, which means death, is used in the Sanskrit text. It says it's something which is akin to death. Svara Yoga, another esoteric teaching in yoga, is showing us that when there is biological life, things are moving in Ida and Pingala, and when the energy moves in Sushumna Nadi, that's the life of the spirit. That's the life of Shiva. That's the transcendental aspect. Life in Prakriti must have plus and minus. Yin and Yang must have Ida and Pingala. Otherwise, you are not alive in this world, but the spirit can be alive in Sushumna. So actually, it compares here the movement of Kundalini in Sushumna with death. Many people say, but do I do yoga to die? In a certain way, in a meaning that when you go to God's consciousness, you are like dead for this world. But as most of you know, the tantric ideal is to have a foot in one boat and a foot in the other boat, to stay in the world and to do the Ida and Pingala, the tick and tock, the yin and yang of the world, and at the same time to be able to go into the life of the pure spirit in Sushumna, to go into the void of Shiva. And that's why sometimes in some forms of yoga and tantra, these two are put like two alternatives. You stay in Prakriti or you go in Purusha. But as you know, be at ease, in tantra there are also statements about cultivating both in parallel, and therefore the choice does not need to be tremendous like this. So it says, you do something, there is a missing trigger, somehow like you beat a snake with a stick, Kundalini Shakti says, what? And she is suddenly on adrenaline, she is suddenly coming up. There is the rising of Kundalini, which those of you who do know already, you know what I'm talking about. And in the two outer nadis, sometimes there is like 13. Then exhale slowly, never violently. People are taught very often to not do violence in many Kundalini mudras. There are some intense forms of breathing in Viparita Karani or in the Oli mudras or something. That's when the Guru indicates here you can inhale very hard. Suddenly when you feel you are choking to death, then you inhale like this and so on. So, but generally in Kundalini, they prefer, especially once the Kundalini is moving, to just go slowly so that you can follow the spiritual and energetic effects of that. Then exhale slowly, never violently. This has been declared indeed to be the Mahamudra by the great Siddhas. So it took like 4 shlokas to describe how to do it. And I'm telling you, the description is not at all complete. And those who did it know, they can confirm that. Now it talks a little bit about the effects for about 5 shlokas, which is quite big. Normally they talked about an asana for 1 shloka, maximum 2. And when they talked in Siddhasana for 3 shlokas, it was like, whoa, they really give attention to this. Here they took 4 shlokas to describe the Mahamudra, and that incompletely. And then they take another 5 shlokas to describe the benefits of it alone. It says the great impurities, kleshas, like ignorance and even death, are destroyed by this practice. This is why the great sages have called it Mahamudra. You probably did not realize, but there are many mudras, Jalandhara, Uddiyana, this mudra, that mudra, Viparita Karani, and so on. But this one is called Maha. Maha means the great one. Mahamudra. Mahamudra. Yeah? So Mahamudra is called Mahamudra because it has very radical effects. And the 2 which are given here, it says the great impurities are destroyed. And the great impurities is interpreted in yoga in 2 ways. There are 5 impurities on the 5 chakras. Like, for example, on Muladhara, you have impurities such as laziness, fear, and greed. And these are comparable somewhere with the 7 capital sins from the Christian mysticism. Yeah? These are the poisons of each chakra. Each of the 5 elements has a poison. And either when you say the great impurities are destroyed, it means cleaning the first 5 chakras of their impurities, like the Tibetans do it with the Dhyani Buddhas, for example, practice. But also there is a commentator which says, well, when he says Maha Klesha, because the word impurity is Klesha, when he says the Maha Klesha is eliminated, then it's like you take the worst of those 5. And the worst of those 5 is called avidya, or ignorance. And this is quoted by Buddha like being the key of all the problems. Buddha does not speak about chakras and 5 kleshas and so on, and he speaks about the one which sums them, or which is the queen of all the impurities, and that is the impurity on Vishuddha according to the Tibetan system, and it is called avidya, or ignorance. And Buddha says the cause of suffering, because he says life is full of suffering. What's the cause? The cause is ignorance. As simple as that. He keeps it very simple, very straightforward. And therefore, he says the ignorance in particular, and perhaps all the other kleshas, and even death. Again, they come obsessively that Mahamudra, like one of them, can destroy death. Okay, maybe somebody will not reach to live 800 years like Methuselah or Noah or whatever. But what if somebody like this guru of Iyengar, Krishnamacharya, who was a monkey yogi, he was doing gymnastic yoga, but he was doing this gymnastic yoga is very intense. He lived 101 years. BKS Iyengar, his disciple, who was a reasonably good Hatha yogi, but not very much in the esoteric Hatha yoga, but still, he also lived 95 years or something. Like people doing Hatha yoga every day and being fit in this way, they definitely cheated death for 20 more years, 30 more years compared to the normal people around them. The average life in India is probably somewhere in the 60s or in the early 70s. And Krishnamacharya lived 102 or 103 or whatever, I'm not saying anybody wants to live 100 years of age, but I'm simply saying that when they say it cheats death, the great impurities like ignorance and even death are destroyed by this practice, you take it with a pinch of salt. Maybe for Babaji, it made him live 8,000 years. Maybe for Krishnamacharya, it made him live 101 years. there are ratios, which shows Babaji is much, 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 much bigger than Krishnamacharya. No, but it still shows some ratios of the same phenomenon. This is why the great sages have called it Maha Mudra, the great mudra. 15. After having performed this on the side of the moon, one should do it also on the side of the sun. So it tells us always that this is a polar practice. You can never do Mahamudra or like practices more on one side than on the other. It results in disaster usually. One can discontinue only when the number of rounds is equal for both sides. It's seldom that such a quick text which goes quickly, nevertheless he remembered and he said, I really have to put that down on paper. Like everybody should remember, you should not do unequal amounts of practice. You do 8 to the left, you do 8 to the right. It has always to be equal. So they consider it quite important. 16. For him then, for the one who does this, there is no longer food that is forbidden or recommended. No, India and the whole Hatha Yoga Pradipika in chapter 1 said you should eat this, you should not eat that. This is like when you have reached to do the Mahamudras, I don't know how many times per day, the Kundalini phenomena becomes so strong that you can cross any limit. So it says, when you reach this level, then you go to another level of life. All the rasas become enjoyable to him, and even the deadliest poison gets digested as if it were nectar. We can wonder if the great Rasputin was practicing Mahamudras in secret or not, because we know historically that he was quite immune to deadly poison. Such statements about deadly poison, they appear in Hatha Yoga Pradipika when he talks about Shitali Pranayama, that Shitali Pranayama makes one immune to poisons. It also is mentioned when he talks about Mayurasana, the peacock pose, that by doing the peacock pose a lot, one becomes immune to stale food, even if you eat indigestible food, altered, rotten eggs, God knows what, salmonella, bacteria, and so on, you will live. Your system is extremely strong. This is also mentioned here for Mahamudra. It says this kind of practice of Mahamudra, it triggers such a rising of Kundalini and such a sublimation that all the tastes become enjoyable, like even if you eat food which is stale, old, whatever, poisons, and even the deadliest poison gets digested as if it were nectar. The gods drink nectar, and that's supposed to be the best of the best. 17. Diseases like consumption, leprosy. Consumption and leprosy were two of the main killers in feudal India. There was no cure for tuberculosis, except of course pranayama and yoga, no Mahamudra, and leprosy was also an incurable disease in those days, and the Ayurvedic doctors were at a loss at what to do about it. So diseases like consumption, leprosy, spleen enlargement, abdominal disorders, constipation, indigestion, and various disorders of the doshas, it's a salad, because tuberculosis is a deadly and very painful disease, and they mix it with indigestion and constipation. These are minor things. You can solve constipation by doing Uddiyana Bandha and all that. So it's like, it's a mixture. You cannot say that this is the most systematic list and put in the order of their importance and all that. It just is a selective list, whatever Mr. Svatmarama remembered, and then he says, disease is like, but it means therefore there is much more, but I don't have space to mention it here. You filled up the gaps. Disease is like consumption, leprosy, spleen enlargement, abdominal disorders, constipation, indigestion, and various disorders of the doshas, but everything is a disorder of the doshas in Ayurveda. They are completely destroyed for those who practice Mahamudra. So Mahamudra is a sort our normal healing in yoga is a healing through asanas and the healing through pranayama. But then they go to the mudras. This is a healing through kundalini. This is a paranormal healing where you simply burn out anything by kundalini. In practice, it's a little bit of a snake biting its tail, because people who are very sick, they can no longer practice kundalini. Kundalini becomes too strong for them, and then if they jump directly in kundalini, they can suffer a heart attack or a vascular accident, an AVC, and then they die because they tried kundalini too suddenly, too directly. So it's a little bit like kundalini can do incredible healing, but one has to be able to practice that kundalini. And otherwise, it's considered to be a sort of a miraculous healer, even the first one here, Mahamudra. And the last shloka for it, number 18, says, "Thus has been explained Mahamudra, which bestows upon its practitioner great success." But actually the word used in Sanskrit is siddhi, and it means success, but it also means paranormal abilities. And it is on purpose left unclear, like what did the author mean? Because of the rising of Kundalini, in time there will appear paranormal abilities, or it's just great success, great perfection in practice. Both are true simultaneously. It is to be scrupulously kept secret and should not be revealed to one and all. They said in the beginning, don't talk about mudras. With Mahamudra, again, they come, and specifically for it, it says this Mahamudra can do miracles and give you great success or siddhi, but it is to be scrupulously kept secret and should not be revealed to one and all. I did teach Mahamudra to tens of people in my life, no? But it's not to one and all. I'm not publishing a book with a video about how to do it. That would go against the advice of the Shastras. The advice of the Shastra says it can be taught to disciples in a yoga school, those who have the patience and the perseverance to learn these things, but you don't just make it public and throw it to the pigs out there, because that's not the way it is done. So the tradition is very clear. It's not a secretomania. It is because of certain rules of engagement. And then it moves directly, without any further warning, to the second in the list, which is the second in the triad. The first three make a family, and the first is Mahamudra, and the second is called Mahabandha, which is described starting with the shloka number 19. Place the left heel against the perineum, and the word is used Yonishtana, not Shivani, which is the normal anatomic name for the perineum. Yonishtana is the place of the yoni, which for women is clearly the vulva, the external manifestation of the genitals, the external part of the genital organs. And therefore it gives rise to sexual interpretations, and also it shows that it's a practice for the women as well, implicitly. Practice the left heel against the perineum Yonishtana and the right foot on the left thigh. In Agama, we do a slightly different version of this, but part of it, it's just the same. Here they present another version. Of course, I know this version and the one taught in Agama and a couple of others, and here in Agama we teach the stronger version of it. That's why different gurus, different schools have slight variations, knowing the different variations of these techniques. Number 20. Inhale the Vayu in the heart. So here it speaks about pranayama. Take the prana in the area of the heart chakra. Inhale the Vayu in the heart. Place the chin on the chest, which for those who know is Jalandhara Bandha. Contract the perineum, which is Mula Bandha. These are two of the main bandhas. And focus the mind into the central channel. But it is put in such a way, it says in the middle of your mind. Madhya mana madhya, and therefore it can be interpreted as in the upper part of the central channel, up here somewhere, or some people say, like in Shambhavi Mudra, in Ajna Chakra. Focus your mind in the deep levels of Ajna Chakra. Yeah? So it tells us about an inhale in a position. Then it says, hold the breath as long as possible, and then exhale slowly. Everybody who did Mahabandha in Agama knows that there is at least 2 or 3 tricks which are not being mentioned. And they are not being mentioned not because Svatmarama forgot, but because he doesn't want you to learn to do it from his book and then do it and get some accident and then complain, look, I read this book of Svatmarama and it taught me something really stupid, and look what I got out of it. That's why I'm saying it again and again. Such techniques, you should learn them from a teacher step by step, because the teacher knows exactly where the pitfalls are, because they practiced it themselves and they know what is possible and what is to be avoided. And then it says, after doing this on the left side, practice again on the right side. Again, it tells us Mahabandha is also a polar technology. You should not do it only on the left or only on the right. Big imbalance can result. 22. Some yogins believe, actually the word yogi is not mentioned. They say some believe, but who? Only teachers of yoga, only experienced people know and have an opinion about these things. Some yogins believe that the contraction of the throat or Jalandhara Bandha, they don't use, they say Kanta Bandha. Kanta is the throat, contracting the throat. But there is no technique in yoga which is called Kanta Bandha. It's just another name, an alias to Jalandhara Bandha. So some believe that the contraction of the throat is not necessary here, and that the contraction of the tongue, Jihva Bandha, is preferable. Jihva Bandha is usually interpreted when you take your tongue and put it up into the vault of the palate, and the tongue is like this. It's curled up and pressing on the palate. So some yogis say you can do it with Jalandhara, some say you just do Jihva Bandha. In Agama, we prefer to teach it to people with Jalandhara Bandha. We think it's strong, but Svatmarama is very honest, and he says, I heard that some people say, you don't need Jalandhara, you can just do Jihva Bandha. This stops the rising of energy in all the nadis except in Sushumna Nadi. Jihva Bandha is something which is done in the Taoist exercises. When you do the microcosmic orbit, you put the tongue up, and it is supposed to connect two central meridians. There is a central meridian which goes from the lower lip down to the genitals and the perineum through the front side of your body, just central. 3 focuses or governing ways or something, whatever. There are 2 of these meridians, which is one on the front side, and one goes from the upper lip up on the skull and through the back and down along the spine, down to the perineum. These 2 create a circle, and they represent like a sort of a yin and yang. In between them, there is everything. And the only thing which is missing is to have them united. And to unite them, you put the tongue up. And in this way, the lower jaw, where the tongue is, gets connected to the higher jaw, because the tongue is pressing on the vault of the palate. And then the energy from this acupuncture point goes through the tongue to the lower lip, and from the lower lip. So in this way, this meridian and this meridian, they get connected, and the energy starts running like in a loop through them. And therefore, they know in yoga, they don't say about this loop, they say this stops the rising of energy in all nadis except in Sushumna Nadi. Like it centers the energy. The energy is very much in the middle, and all the other nadis become like unimportant for a while. And he concludes 23 by saying, verily, this Mahabandha bestows great siddhis. 24. It is an efficient way to become free from the bondage of death. Again, the same obsession. It is an efficient way to become free from the bondage of death. Unites the 3 flows of energy in Triveni. When you study the chakras, you know that there is a point slightly above Ajna chakra, which still belongs to the area of Ajna chakra, but it's slightly above the position of Ajna chakra as a chakra. It's somewhere near the hairline, like 2-3 centimeters above, which is called Triveni, which is a name from India. It is a place where 3 major rivers, the Ganga, the Yamuna, and the Sarasvati, 3 big rivers, Ganga being the biggest of them, they meet. And this place is placed near Allahabad, near a city somewhere in the state of Bihar or someplace in the northeast of India. This place is. And the yogis have been very happy that there is such a geographical space, because they said exactly as in Triveni, the 3 rivers are meeting. Now, if you want to be scrupulous, there is like 100 meters between the 2 confluences. So they don't meet exactly in the same spot, but that's to be perfectionistic. So they say exactly as the 3 big rivers meet in Triveni, exactly like this, the 3 most important channels of energy, Ida, Pingala, and Sushumna, they have a meeting point here. It's not exactly on the skin out, it's inside the head, it's a bit deeper, but it's a place where Ida, Pingala, and Sushumna, they have a crossing point, and it's the last crossing point. Ida and Pingala, they don't go beyond this. Beyond this, only Sushumna goes, because then there is no polarity. It goes in Sahasrara. And therefore, it's to go to Triveni means to obtain full Ajna chakra, to go beyond the Ajna chakra, and to have the door open to go to Sahasrara. And here it says, this Mahabandha, it unites the 3 flows of energy in Triveni and transports the mind to Kedara, which is the seat of Shiva on Kailash, on Mount Kailash, where Shiva sits. That place is called Kedara. So it sends your mind to Shiva, which is either Shambhavi Mudra, like Shiva, and of course Sahasrara, the traditional seat of Shiva. So it says this Mahabandha breaks the locks up there. Shloka 25 will be hated by feminists because it uses an analogy from medieval India, which is sexist and not politically correct. It says, just as the beauty and the charm of a woman serve no purpose in the absence of a man. No, like, why is the woman trying to be beautiful and charming when there is no man around? No, then she's charming for nothing and for nobody. And it's like a thunder hitting the water, you know, it's of no use. Of course, modern feminists will say that women can choose to be beautiful for their own sake, and there's a lot of nonsense being said there. The medieval yogis, they didn't bother about sexism, gender issues, political correctness. They just took the analogies from the villages in India. In the 1500, when this was written, in a village of India, a woman was beautiful to be liked by men, to attract the attention of men. Otherwise, there was no purpose. Why would you do that? Just for the sake of some abstract philosophy. So just as the beauty and the charm of a woman serve no purpose in the absence of a man, so the Mahamudra and Mahabandha are useless without the Mahaveda. So the number 3 in the list is introduced like that is closing the triangle. There is a triangle and all 3 together, they do something. So it doesn't say you shouldn't do one without the other. You can, but it says you get full efficiency when you do all 3 of them. And thus, 26 describes the Mahaveda. Sitting in the Mahabandha posture, the same as in the Mahabandha, the yogin should inhale with concentrated mind and then hold the breath with the contraction of the throat, Jalandhara Bandha again, stopping also the movements of the energy. This is usually done for those who know that you contract the body. You do a Jalandhara Bandha and you keep the body very stiff. Mahaveda done without stiffening the body can be painful or even dangerous. Then 27. Place both hands flat on the ground, lift the body a little, and strike the bottom against the ground gently. as absurd as it sounds, you lift yourself and you make boom, 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 boom. You just kick your butt on the ground. Some do it quite strongly and it's dangerous and painful. The text starts by saying a little, lift the body a little and kick it gently. The energy or vayu leaves the two nadis and goes quivering into the middle one. It's always the same thing. No more tick-tock, tick-tock. It goes in the middle, which means the breath is like stopping and there is a bit of shunya nadi. Usually it is manifested through a long retention of the breath and the state where you are like frozen. This brings about the union of the currents of the moon, sun and fire, which verily leads to immortality. Moon is Ida, sun is Pingala, and fire is Sushumna. So it means the energy from the two gets united, and when it goes up here, there is no more Ida and Pingala, there is only Sushumna. So usually that takes over, and that leads to immortality. Again, a reference to death, but it's a reference to a state of spiritual awakening. When there is cessation of activity in the two nadis, exhale gently. So first there is this state which is like death, and then when the body cannot take it anymore, that's the general rule in pranayama and everywhere, then you exhale gently. This Mahaveda crowns one's efforts with great siddhis, destroys wrinkles, gray hair, and old age tremors. Again, it gives us like it's a clinic of gerontology. It's for elderly people to become youthful again. Okay, but when a yogi who is 20 years old does Mahabandha, Mahamudra, Mahabandha, Mahaveda, he doesn't do it because he has wrinkles or tremors of old age or something, or gray hair. Therefore, these are just a sort of a spectacular description, but otherwise. And so it says, this Mahaveda crowns one's efforts with great siddhis, destroys wrinkles, gray hair, and old age tremors, and is practiced by the best sadhakas. And to conclude, I wanted to conclude at least these three mudras for tonight as essential, the first three in the Kundalini Yoga of Svatmarama. There are two more shlokas which talk about this, and which go, number 30, saying this triad of mudras is to be kept very secret. Again, the third time the secrecy is coming up, and I completely second that. We always teach the people who learn Kundalini here in Agama to not teach it chaotically or not speak chaotically and freely about it. It's okay to teach it once you have become a teacher and once you are given the license to be a teacher of Kundalini, but then it means you are going to teach it in a very orderly way, in a very cautious way, not damaging people around. So this triad of mudras is to be kept very secret. It destroys old age and death, again, probably the 5th time this is mentioned. Increases the gastric heat, which in Ayurveda is like if you haven't got digestive fire, you die, because you cannot process food properly, and then it's the beginning of the end. So it increases the gastric heat and bestows great siddhis like anima, etc. In the moment when you say anima, it means anima, garima, lagima, mahima, and all the others, paraprakamya, ishvarya, and all the rest. I once knew them, all of them in Sanskrit. And usually anima is the flagship, is the first of them. And anima means to levitate, to be light to beat gravitation, to not depend on gravitation anymore. So this is the list of the 8 Mahasiddhis. So it says this can give, with Ajna Chakra, great Mahasiddhis. And then number 31, which is the last, says a very difficult thing for the hardcores. It says they should be practiced every 3 hours, daily 8 times. That means you can never have more than 2.5 hours of sleep. Right? Like you have to sleep chunks of 2 hours, wake up and do more Mahamudra, Mahabandha, Mahaveda. Some people even say doing it, they translate here, that you have to do 8 sets. So you have to do 8 Mahamudras, 8 Mahabandhas, 8 that takes a hell of a long time, and takes at least 1 hour to do those, and then you have to do it every 3 hours. Then you hardly sleep. You just sleep and do Mahamudras. That's all you can do the whole day. They bring up virtues and create merit. So it says that somehow they create good karma. They create spiritual karma, because that's the meaning of creating merit, and destroy vices and sin. They create virtues and destroy vices. It means they create positive resonances with high forces, and they destroy negative resonances, like I am addicted to smoking. By doing Mahamudra, Mahabandha, Mahaveda, you will stop wishing to smoke. But it also says they also create merit and destroy sin, which means they create positive spiritual karma and they destroy negative karma by the effort of such practice, because Mahamudra, Mahabandha, Mahaveda, they are heavy duty practices, and when you do them, you really do. They should be done gradually under the good guidance of a guru. It here insists again in the end that without guidance, many things can go wrong, and when you have a guru, you do them gradually. Like you start with 3 Mahamudras, then you go to 5 Mahamudras, then you go to 7 Mahamudras. You have to practice a certain gradual thing, which gurus know very well how to give. With this, we have reached to the shloka number 31. We are about 1/4, 25% in this chapter. This chapter has about 120 shlokas. We have discussed 3 mudras out of the 10. There will be many more discussions about other techniques from Kundalini Yoga and bandhas and mudras. This is a very powerful chapter. Please, if you have not studied these things with a teacher concretely, do not try to apply them just because you read me talking about it. You heard me talking about it, because these things have to be learned properly. Otherwise, they cause damage. With this, let us stop for tonight from the reading from Hatha Yoga Pradipika, and we'll continue. When we'll continue, apparently next week is still a week of Satsang, and we'll continue with more teachings about Kundalini Yoga and the great mudras. I know that teaching such chapters like the last one about pranayama and this one about mudras can be a bit frustrating for people who are beginners in yoga and outsiders, because we keep talking about all sorts of insane practices and people say, could we not try? This is not a yoga course. This is what is called a satsang. I'm commenting for you a fundamental text, and if you want to learn the practicalities of it, please come get yourself a teacher and learn under supervision, and then you will be protected from any trouble with these things. Therefore, don't be frustrated. These things are just showing you things which are being done in Agama and other yoga schools, especially when you go to the levels of Kundalini Yoga and those practices. With this, let us stop for tonight. Thank you all for joining. As you know, we don't take questions in the satsangs. We have Q&A sessions where people can ask all the questions they want to ask. Enough for tonight. Thank you.